All right. So welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Last session of the day during our virtual forum. Usually when we're in person, I think everyone runs for the coffee around this time. So I hope you're hanging in there and doing well, staying safe. For those who don't know me, I'm Sandra Miola. I'm the director of the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. Before I hand it off to Kelly, our moderator, just a few housekeeping items. Would love to see all of your faces if you feel comfortable in doing so. We don't care what your hair looks like. It's all okay. Feel free, Dan, feel free to change your name into your first and last name as well, along with your organization and gender pronoun if you feel comfortable. Please be sure to mute yourself unless you're speaking. We have a relatively small group of about 22 folks right now. It probably will grow in a few minutes, but we might be able to forego the chat box and just, take yourself off mute during the Q&A portion. And we can kind of play that by ear as we get further along. If you have any technical difficulties, I cannot call myself an expert, but feel free to chat me directly and I will do my best to assist you. Lastly, the rest of the forum, I can't believe it's half over after this session, but the rest of the forum schedule can be found on the sketch.com website. I'll put the link in the chat box for you all. And now I'll turn it over to Kelly.
Thanks, Sandra. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelly Knudsen, State Policy Manager with the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. And again, thanks for joining us virtually. Today, we're also joined by the Coalition's New York State lead, Jeff, Molly, and Sherry at Friends of the Upper Delaware. So welcome. Over the next hour, participants in this session will engage on the Coalition's state policy priorities and discuss strategy and tactics for the remainder of this legislative session. And we encourage everyone involved today to be forward and collaborative with your ideas in order to develop the best shared approach to our clean water advocacy. And just as a reminder that this conversation will be the start to a larger and continuing conversation, and we're happy to follow up with any resources and information mentioned on this session at a later date. And all of you here, as you know, are integral in achieving our victories across the watershed. And we look forward to furthering that partnership with you beyond this call and at the forum. And given, the volume of participants, again, we're a smaller group, we just want to provide an opportunity for everyone to speak. So please be mindful of others on today's call, allowing their perspectives to also be heard. Now, these interactive state policy sessions will actually be occurring for each basin state. We certainly invite folks to participate in other strategy calls as applicable to your organization's scope of work. So details and time for those sessions can be found on sketch.com. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jeff to get us started. Take it away.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining. There are some familiar faces and names in the group that I can see that play a direct role here in New York State in the Upper Delaware River watershed with the work of the Coalition. And as Kelly said, with my organization, Friends of the Upper Delaware River, which is the state lead group for the Coalition, and has been for quite a few years now. And so we've been able to build a pretty good list of Coalition members from New York State that are typically nonprofit organizations, both local, regional, and statewide. These are the groups that help us do the work of the Coalition and advance the Coalition's priorities in New York State, which traditionally have been primarily at the federal level. So we've worked really, really hard on the federal Delaware River program, for example, over the years, and spent a lot of time in Washington working with the New York congressional delegation, especially on the House side. Some of you might remember Congressman Chris Gibson. He was around at the beginning when we started talking about the federal program, and then he was succeeded by Congressman John Faso. This is from the New York 19th District, and then of course we all saw Congressman Delgado yesterday morning opening comments for the conference. He's our current congressman, and through communications with those three, plus us on the Senate side, and in combination with the Coalition in the other states, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, we got that federal program in place, and that was a really big deal. I'll talk about that in just a few seconds about how that's working in the Upper Delaware. But so more recently, we've turned our attention to state level policy priorities, thanks to the Coalition for having the vision to see the potential for that in the state of New York. That's really exciting for us, and it's breaking new ground. I'm old enough actually to tell you that 30 years ago, I started my career in Albany, and still have connections there. Albany, obviously the state capital of New York. That's where we're going to be spending a lot of time and energy in the coming years here. So we will pay attention to probably 3 or 4 different policy priorities. We work on plastics legislation and some clean water policy, but the overwhelming favorite and the overwhelming priority is, it won't surprise anybody, is a funding campaign out of Albany to bring new funding to the Upper Delaware River watershed. Those of you who live in New York know that this is a giant state full of unbelievably beautiful, iconic water bodies that span from the Great Lakes through the Finger Lakes and the Adirondacks and down the Hudson River to the Long Island Sound, and everywhere in between. There's just tons and tons of water here. So while we are obviously Upper Delaware River centric, we are savvy enough to understand that at a political level in the state of New York, the Upper Delaware River has traditionally been a tough place to gain political traction when it comes to state funding. And a lot of that really is, in my estimation, is because the wheel, what did the congressman say yesterday about the squeaky wheel and the grease and all that? I think that's directly relevant here. There's a lot of advocacy going on in the Adirondacks and the Catskills, which is, we'll talk about in a second, which is tangentially related to our location. But also the Finger Lakes and the Great Lakes and the Long Island Sound. They all have really well-organized constituencies lobbying for them in Albany for resources. The Upper Delaware River, not so much historically. That is now starting to change, and I think there's a couple of different reasons for that. I think the adoption of the federal program is now shining a national spotlight on the Upper Delaware River in New York that has never been there before. There's growing, I think we're in a really populated northeastern United States, part of the northeastern United States, and I think the appetite for outdoor recreation is increasing all the time. Sherry can tell you, she's been here longer than I, but just in the last couple of years, for example, the kayaking and the canoeing, in addition to the fly fishing up here, has just exploded up here in ways that we haven't seen before. So there's a lot of public attention coming, the people coming here, COVID notwithstanding, and I think that's only going to increase. And so we're moving in a direction where we're building momentum around this watershed. This is many folks might not know this. It's also a national park here. It's a different kind of national park, but it is a national park, scenic and recreational unit. Comes with a lot of cachet too. And so, this is the work of our coalition, the work of FUDR and our partners, is to continue to build the profile here. And so when we go to Albany, we're not lost in the sauce, right? We're not lost in, a larger discussion that's out competing us. And that's the energy that we have to change. And thankfully, we have help here. And that's where the coalition has come in. Over the years, the coalition has lent tremendous resources and support to help us here at FUDR and our partners advance with federal and state policies. The other disadvantage we have, and I think this is true, Sandra and Kelly, is in the other 3 states that are part of this coalition, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, the presence of your leadership is closer to or in the state capital. So when you're talking about state policy, you're right there. You can walk out the door and cross the street and walk into the State House, right? We're 2 hours and 20 minutes from Albany, right? So we have to kind of do it differently. And that's where, and I think some of these groups are on the phone today, that's where we want to rely on our national and state partners who are much more active and more regularly in Albany. Those of you who lobby in legislatures at any level, you kind of have to be there a lot, right? And I know the COVID situation has changed that up a little bit, but we expect to at some point to come back to normal here. And so we have a number of partners who are in Albany that we really hope can help us and lend their time and resources to our objective here, which again is to bring additional funding from the state level for restoration protection efforts in the Upper Delaware River watershed in the state of New York. Those groups in Albany, they are the New York League of Conservation Voters. Although I'm not sure if you have a full-time staff person, Lisa, there, but you spend a lot of time there. You also have a boss that came from a very high level position up in Albany, and she retains a lot of connections there. The Catskill Mountain Keeper is another group that we are going to rely on for help. They have an office here in the Western Catskills, but they also have a full-time lobbyist up in Albany. We hope Nikki from Ducks Unlimited can play a role. I know that they are fairly active in Albany, and Mark from Appalachian Mountain Club. You know, they also have program presence there as well. These are important partners that are either regional or national in scope. So that's kind of how we're going to leverage our our energy in Albany. If we can't be up there all the time, one of the questions that Kelly put on his outline is how's COVID affecting us? It's affecting us the same way it's affecting everybody else, right? We got to do things differently, right? We can't just get in the car and drive up there and get in meetings where there's 10 people in a room like we normally would, and walk around the hill all day and rub shoulders with people. So one of the things we are doing, we can talk about in a second, we have a Hill Day planned in October, a virtual Hill Day. Sandra and Kelly, have you done any? Has anybody on the phone done one of these yet? Because we haven't, but we're going to. And I imagine it's going to be something like this we're doing right now, where we'll have legislative staff. And look at those little things. I must be saying something right. We'll have legislative staff or the legislators, on a Zoom call, and sort of spend the day virtually like we would, walking around the State House. So that's coming up in October. Everyone will be invited to that. We hope we can pull that off. And so timing wise, the fund that we're looking at, the obvious one that everyone looks at in the state of New York, is the $300 million Environmental Protection Fund, right? That's the bucket of money that everybody goes after. And we haven't really seen any of that, I don't think, ever in the Upper Delaware River. Maybe we have, and I don't know, but it's certainly not, Upper Delaware River has not been on that list. And we want to change that up. So we started this work. This is also, by the way, supported very generously by the William Penn Foundation in addition to the coalition. We started building a campaign about maybe a year and a half ago. And you got to remember, it's just me and Sherry and Molly here in the office, right? We don't have a whole army of people. So that's why we work to build our coalition membership so we can get help. And we have a list there. I don't know if we can share that list or when we want to do that, Kelly, but I don't know if you want to do, we can flash that list at some point and so everyone can see who is a member of our, and many of them are, I think some of them are on the call. One of the things we got to remember, the Upper Delaware River, the geography here. Sometimes we call this a tale of two watersheds, sometimes a tale of three watersheds. For those of you who are unfamiliar or not from the state of New York or don't live here, you may or may not have heard of a term called the New York City watershed. That is the very top of the Upper Delaware River watershed in the Western Catskills. It's above the big New York City reservoirs at Neversink, Papacton, and Cannonsville. That is an area that we actually have not that focused on. Why? Because the city of New York has invested billions of dollars up above their reservoirs to keep their water clean. They don't have to filter. The feds say they don't have to filter it if they can keep the water clean. One way to keep the water clean, of course, is to make sure the land is undisturbed. So one of the big pieces of their watershed protection plan is to buy a lot of land, and that's what they have done. It's a controversial issue up here. It has to be navigated very carefully, but that has happened over the decades, again, to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. So we're kind of thinking like, hey, there's enough money up in that New York City watershed, but there's, by contrast, below their reservoirs, the investment has been close to zero, really. Although that's changed recently. So our focus has been the tailwaters below those dams. Historically, FUDR was originally founded as a fly fishing group, so we only really kind of focused on the cold water section, which is just the first section below those dams. So the river, of course, continues running south through Sullivan County and down through Port Jervis. So if anybody knows their New York geography, this is the area we're talking about, below the dams, all the way to where the 3 states come together. That's our jurisdiction. And what we found when we started expanding our horizons here was that politically that was advantageous for us. Sullivan County, New York, has a couple of fairly influential state legislators, State Senator Jennifer Metzger and State Assemblywoman Aileen Gunther. They represent a big portion of the watershed, and we have become very friendly with them, right, Kelly? You've been up here a few times, had a bunch of meetings with them, been in their office in Albany. They're going to be key for us in the upcoming legislative session, and we need to and they're going to be I foresee them being our champion, in addition to other state legislative targets that we're going to have to cultivate and work with. Those would be your traditional, everyone who lobbies in state legislature knows you go after the committee chairs that run the topic you're looking at. And then of course you also have to get, in our case, to Governor Cuomo's office as well. And you got to kind of connect all those dots. And the goal here, timing wise, is now. The state budget, this is, we're entering that time now where the New York State is starting to formulate their 2021 budget. And now's the time to get in. We can't wait till January 1st when the legislative session begins in Albany. We have to start now, and we are. And that's what that Hill Day in October is. And our goal is and it's an ambitious one, is to have the governor announce in his State of the State address in late January that there's a designated amount of funding in his Environmental Protection Fund, designated for the Upper Delaware River. That is our goal. That's our top state policy priority. And we're going to need the help of everybody we can get it from, all of our members, in addition to those national groups I mentioned. And there's a couple of statewide groups in Albany that are environmental advocates, and the Nature Conservancy. We're really going to need their help as well. So that is our campaign priority. And maybe I don't want to just take up all the time here talking. Not sure if we want to stop Kelly and maybe see if there's any questions at this point. If anybody wants to add anything.
This is Peter Marks. Can I add something?
You always do. You always do.
I'll surprise you what I'm going to add. So I'm Peter Marks. On this group, I'm representing the Ashokan-Pepecton Watershed chapter of Trout Unlimited. We focus on the east branch of the Delaware above the Pepecton Reservoir. My father is from a little town called Fleischman's, New York, which is above the Pepecton Reservoir and the East Branch watershed. So I've been up there my whole life. I have a house up there, just a vacation house. I'm not there year round. I know Jeff refers to it as the New York City watershed. I refer to it as the Upper East Branch of the Delaware watershed, as well as the Upper West Branch of the Delaware watershed. New York City has invested an awful lot of money to protect land, but that is now pretty much stopped because of local opposition to locking up land, taking it out of the tax rolls, which is a very hot local item. But both the East Branch and the West Branch of the Delaware above the reservoirs have some severe problems, water quality problems. Thermal, a lot of sediment, a lot of nutrients. Trout fishery is pretty much impacted a lot in both those rivers. My chapter has been working on trying to do some restoration on the East Branch above the reservoir from Roxbury, New York, down to the Pepecton Reservoir. There are some severe thermal impacts there, in part from an old historic mill dam that's there that dams up the river and probably increases the temperature a good 4 to 5 degrees in the summer, which is really bad for trout. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there, that it is issues above the reservoirs in the upper reaches of the West Branch and East Branch of the Delaware. There are still some severe problems with waters there, It has not been resolved by New York City, although they so far don't have to filter the water, which is their goal here, their financial goal.
To follow up on that, Peter, I hope I didn't mislead anybody. I completely agree that, when we call that the New York City watershed and we don't call it the Delaware River watershed, I think it does a disservice to our goals and objectives as a coalition. So I agree with you there.
It would also apply to the Rondout, upper parts of the Rondout, the upper parts of the Esopus, which are not the Delaware watershed.
We all know watersheds are, the whole concept here is a holistic approach. And when we artificially, even through semantics, bifurcate the watershed, we're doing ourselves a disservice. So while, those New York City dams, they're giant, right? For people who've been up here, that, and they are kind of a bright line in the top of the watershed, but it's still one watershed.
Problems that we have in the upper reaches of the East Branch and the West Branch, that's pretty much mitigated by the reservoirs because that's where all the sediment settles by the time it pops out on your end.
Mm-hmm. Right. So we're not ignoring that part of the watershed. We just geographically and organizationally and by need, we focus on the tailwaters because we have this, the towns below the tailwaters often refer to themselves as the orphan towns, right? They're the ones that did not see the benefits of the entire New York City operation. And we argue, and I think with some validity, that, while New York City put those dams in there, and by the way, created a world-class wild trout fishery, which I know you enjoy from time to time, Peter, then that's been a tourism attribute, recreational attribute of this area. They also altered the hydrology of the river when they did that. And so we spend a lot of time working in coalition at the local level. We have something called the Tailwaters Coalition, which is primarily the municipalities with assistance from Delaware County. And, a lot of what we talk about is, if New York City is indeed responsible for some hydrologic alterations below their dams, might they not lend some resources to this part of the watershed like they do above the dams? And that's a whole giant political discussion that's very difficult, but I think we're making a little bit of progress there in different ways. So I just want folks to know that, in some ways, go ahead, Peter.
As we discussed one other time, they're doing some damage above the reservoirs as well with some of their work, but that's another matter.
Right. I don't mean to suggest that just because they spent billions of dollars up there that everything is immaculate and pristine. And then, and also, and you mentioned it earlier, people need to be aware that if you live up here, there's a whole history of New York City's involvement up here, and not all of it is popular. Okay. So we have there's still remnants of a civil war up here between, the people that, generationally lived here and grew up here, and then this big giant city. It's not even in the Delaware River watershed. It's in the Hudson River watershed. Had this need to expand their water supply, and they certainly did. And they eventually landed in the Delaware watershed, right? And caused all kinds of
compensation to above the reservoirs. Well, maybe a little bit, but.
Right. So, but right now let's go further south. Thank you, Peter. Do you have anything else to say about the New York City watershed?
I have one other thing to add for the Albany stuff.
Yeah.
This is with my other hat as a lobbyist for the coalition. And I don't know how you deal with this, but it should be on people's radar screen. You've already talked about Chris Gibson, John Faso, and Antonio Delgado. New York is going to likely, almost definitely lose a congressional seat in redistricting. So the New York legislature is going to determine redistricting, I guess, 2021 and 2022. And for whatever it's worth, it might be worth keeping your eyes on how that plays out for this watershed. Maybe, keep Delgado or just be conscious of it. You don't want to wind up being an orphan stepchild out of it.
Good point. Let's not forget that there are two other, correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, we have two other Congress members that have tiny pieces of the watershed. It's Anthony Brindisi up north and Sean Patrick Maloney down south. Delgado's got 99.5% of the watershed, I think, but we do have a couple of other congressional players as well. So the other point I really want to make is about that federal Delaware River program and how that has helped us here. So we worked with the three congressmen in the, on the New York, from the New York Congressional District, 19th District, over the years. How many times did we go to Washington, knock on doors down there? Got that program in the waning days of Obama. We're now in the third year of funding. We've received funding, we as an FUDR and our partners, all 3 years. And that has, in addition to the obvious positive effect that's having on the ground stream restoration projects that we have many ongoing right now, it's also allowed us to shine a bright light on the Upper Delaware River watershed at the state level. So when we go to Albany, one of the most compelling messages is, for those of you who have worked with this federal program, we've got that difficulty, and Sandra and Peter, I know you're going to fix this for us, and I think Mike Slattery might be on the phone. Maybe he could fix it for us right now. But that difficult one-to-one match, that's challenging for sure. I understand why it has to be. Congress needs some accountability, and they want to know things are, other people are contributing, and I get that. Up here in the rural sections of the watershed, we're starting to get a little lean on match opportunities. So that's a compelling message, and one that our legislators can understand, right? Our state senators and state assemblywomen, they know how to play that message. And it's, if the state can pony up or contribute to additional resources out of the Environmental Protection Fund or any of these other funds that are available, that can help us with that match challenge with the federal money. It's a real good message for us. So. Is there anybody else on the phone who wants to ask any questions about our work with the coalition or our state level policy priorities?
Jeff, if I could just add a bit about the match requirement. Peter and others did attempt, prior to all the craziness with the pandemic and needing to keep things cleaner and leaner in terms of federal legislation, did attempt to add provisions that would have given us a little bit of relief. Sandra as well was really instrumental in that. So, we didn't get it attached this time around, but there is legislation that is moving through the system, very similar to the Delaware River Basin Conservation Act. It would apply to the Chesapeake, and it addresses that issue in a different way. So, at the very least, when it comes time for reauthorization, we can use that improvement as a way of modifying for reauthorization DRBCA. And I just wanted to call them out for having attempted to do something about it right away, and thank them for those efforts, and put it in people's minds that we have some ideas about how we can address that issue to some extent, at the very latest by reauthorization time, which is in 2023. I know that's not right away. In the meantime, we're continuing to work with NIFWIF, our partners, and think about ways of addressing that match requirement, not always on a project by project basis, but trying to do some things with pooling the match and being able to leverage important projects by doing it more programmatically. So that's something that continues to be a priority for us that we'll continue to discuss with partners as we move forward.
Great, thanks, Mike. That's encouraging. We could use all the help we can get on that front.
Jeff, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, of course.
So speaking of the Chesapeake bill, I've received word that there's also another bill that's going to be introduced on Friday that would mirror the Delaware program, but only, but target the New York, New Jersey estuary. So wanted to flag that for folks as well. And Peter and I talked about it very briefly. It really does mirror the Delaware program. It's a little bit different in terms of funding and match requirements, a little more flexible, but it's their first draft it's their first go at it, and it may change, but I can definitely share that information as it comes out. Just something to think about also as we kind of go into future fiscal years, if there are other competing programs and how that affects our strategy on the Hill as well.
Great. Thanks, Sandra. Any other comments or questions from anybody on the phone or suggestions? So I can think of 4 near-term action items that have to happen. One is the Hill Day. And Sherry, can you remind me what date that is, or Molly? Is that, or Lisa?
It is, we talked about the 21st and 22nd of October.
Okay. Sherry has a weekend signal at her house. This is why she's freezing up. In a moment, you're going to see her cat climb on her.
Meowing right now.
So the lobby day, we've got to organize that. We're doing that in partnership with Lisa. You're on the phone, right? With New York LCV, and we're also. And by the way, is Angela on the phone? Angela Hoteling from New York LCV.
Oh, just me. We are taking the concept of the virtual Hill Day to Julie. I think tomorrow we're chatting with her and we'll get back.
Great, thank you very much. Lisa is our new Angela, who's going to be just as great, or as Angela was for us over the last 2 years. For those of you who know Angela, she moved to Montana on us. So, so there's that. We also put together so when we went up to Albany and said, here's what we want, they said, okay. Our contacts at New York State DEC said, okay, put together a watershed action agenda for us. We need to have a piece of paper in front of us. We did that. We will refresh that. That's something that has to get done very soon. And then also in partnership with New York LCV, we are going to do a online petition that is probably going to be the message of which will be somewhat generic to avoid some lobbying complications, but it will basically say, we support additional resources for the protection and restoration of the Upper Delaware River, and please act accordingly, those of you who are in leadership positions in Albany. And that will be, I think, statewide, right, Lisa? Go out to all your members and our members and other lists as well, I hope. And then we're also doing a sign-on letter with our partners and other supporting organizations. So all that's got to come together pretty quickly here as we get into budget making time up in Albany. Did I cover that, Lisa? Is that all? Did you get all that done yet? Not yet. Okay, close. Hope you're close. Anybody else?
Jeff, did you see that Grace Woodard sent a question through the chat?
I did not.
Can you see the chats on your end, or do you want me to read this to you?
No, I can see it.
Okay.
Grace, we hope, is going to be one of our new coalition members. Her and her associated organization are going to have submitted an application to become a member of the New York delegate, our New York coalition. Hi, Grace. The question is the issue of lack of attention, one of branding or promotion, new ideas? I don't know. Does anybody else on the phone have any thoughts on that? I think it's both, really. I think if you're asking why is the Upper Delaware River not as high profile as some of the other water bodies in the state of New York, it's smaller geographically, I think is one answer to that question, Grace. I think the other answer we've already talked about in part is the watershed above the New York City reservoirs. That is an area that has received so much attention and so much funding and so many resources that I think people sometimes will lump that area together with the area that we're focused on below the dams. And there's an assumption that everything's taken care of because New York City is spending so much money there to keep the water clean. And again, below the dams, that's just not the case. Branding and promotion, sure. We just hasn't been, this is a rural area. There's not a lot of organizations like ours to deliver that message and to tell that story and to go to Washington and go to Albany. And, that just hasn't really, we have some of that, of course, but, it's not like, like the Long Island Sound, for example, that has its own federal program. It's so important, right? We didn't get, and that was in place decades ago. We didn't get our federal program till 3 years ago. So I don't know if that's a good answer or not. Anybody else want to take a shot at that?
Jeff, I would add in there too, like part of this new grant funding from CDRW is to help build that brand of the coalition in Albany, to have that recognition up there and relationships to leverage as well, which we're starting to do more and more, but hopefully that will become easier as we start to have a bigger presence there as well.
Right, thank you. Dan Plummer just wrote that someone should make a movie about the area. Huh, there's a novel idea. Dan, do you want to elaborate on that at all?
Yes, I think it's a wonderful idea. I think someone should make a movie about FUDR and all the hard work you people are doing, all the characters, and I think it'd be a great idea.
Right.
Yeah. You could be, I'm watching you do this and you look, you know, that eagle behind you flying over your shoulder. You know, I can see the camera coming in for a close-up on you. I think it could be really, really powerful.
And Dan, like Zoom, it's pants optional, right?
That's in the Upper Delaware Watershed. No, exactly what Jeff was answering Grace's question. I think that it's something that hasn't been done, and we are making a film now on the Upper Delaware region. It's not just Upper Delaware, the Upper Delaware River, but it is kind of Upper Delaware centric, and it's just kind of telling the story about all the struggles, and hopefully we'll be able to reach the millions of people that just live 3 hours from our area in a meaningful way. And we should have a rough cut in a couple of weeks, and then hopefully we'll have something to be submitting to the film festivals this coming fall and winter. So I think it's a start. Could be a great tool for exactly what Grace is talking about if somebody like Netflix or Amazon or Hulu picks it up. Stay tuned.
Thanks, Dan. We look forward to seeing the film.
Jeff, can I throw something into your policy considerations? Little bit on the policy, wonk side. In many places, municipalities are contributors to open space protection and conservation. It's another funding source, and these days municipalities are pretty stretched, but sometimes they do contribute, and especially right now when we've seen a lot of use of open space throughout the watershed, the issue has come front and center. And so there is a new movement in New York State to allow municipalities to use some of their transfer tax revenues for open space conservation. They've always been able to do it, but they had to get an act of state legislation to do it for each municipality. And there is movement afoot in Albany to pass legislation to allow any municipality to do it without having to go directly to the legislature. They still have to go through a process, a ballot referendum and all the rest, but it takes one hurdle out of the process. So I would ask you to consider adding that to your policy initiatives when you go to Albany.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Is there a group or a legislator that's championing the cause here that you're aware of?
I'll get you the information.
Okay, great. Thank you. While we have you, Steve, one of the things, Steve is my neighbor, by the way, and for years has told me, I guess agitated a little bit to get FUDR and our partner groups a little more involved in the Never Sink watershed. And I know that's music to Grace's and Alex's ears, our potential new members who we had on the phone the other day, who are also on the phone today. It's just geographically, it's a little further away from us. And from a fly fishing perspective, we tend to focus on the West Branch and the Upper East Branch and the main stem because it has this wild trout appeal to it, and that's largely where our members will come to fish. But the Never Sink River, right, Steve, is a fine trout river in its own right and a wonderful watershed to work in and protect. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. And I'm happy to see Al and Grace on the call today. Al and Grace have been involved in the DRWI. They have put in 3 water quality monitoring stations on the Bashakill to continuously monitor the quality of the water in relation to a particular threat, but also to gather data to help us understand better how to conserve the land in that area. Maybe Al and Grace want to talk a little bit about that.
Alex?
Yeah, if you want to kick it off, I'll jump in.
Sure. We have grown organically from having been a watchdog over what I would consider 4 or 5 very inappropriate proposed developments. One exists fully. It's the poster child of segmentation, if people know all about segmentation. Right above the Bashakill, it's like putting either the Barclays Center or the Sydney Opera House on a hillside with very poor access, with a history of building without permits and polluting the Bashakill. So that has kicked us, these various projects have kicked us into action, and a lot of the impetus for action has come from Alex. But we've had a lot of spontaneous community folks who wake up in the morning, go to work at 7, see pollution, take photographs, distribute the photographs. We get DEC involved. So there was a fellow out canoeing, smelling something from his house. Oh, pollution, untreated waste coming out of the hillside, connecting us to it, reporting it. So we've been building up a database in many areas, foiling the town, holding the town responsible, holding its feet to the fire, challenging the 4 projects that I'd mentioned since really 2013, 14, and also pressing for re-looks at projects. Some have disappeared, but we think they're like zombies. They will come back and they will never die. And so the Neversink and this area is much similar, more similar to Sullivan County geographically than much of Orange County. The geography here is so defining of both of the history and the economic status of this area. And so the Neversink is the crown jewel. It was a place where, when they first did beautiful stamps, they were all, it was all dedicated here with fly fishing stamps. And I know Roscoe gets a lot of attention, but we have had wonderful help from anglers when we needed to protest an expansion, and anglers and hunters showed up. We have a variety of political views within this community, and so it doesn't suffer from a certain kind of elitist telling others what to do. So we're the most recent thing that we think we will roll back, and Alex can jump in here because It's through his mapping and drone work and that a development on the Neversink, really one of the first housing developments, is now going to have a positive declaration. 20 houses on 8 acres, like a city squash project, 1/3 acres each. And so we think we're going to, and we produced and pushed and pushed. So much of our efforts take us away from monitoring, but we then end up pressuring and calling every person we can to write a letter, and we get the news involved too, and we need to do that more. That's one of my things to do today, is contact the newspaper. So Alex, I've gone on a lot.
Right. Well, I mean, look, I'm not going to claim to know as much about water as probably everyone else in this group. You know, I mean, I've been in recycling, other environmental stuff for a long time, but water's come more recently. And, you know, I'm probably a little behind in, you know, the legislation stuff and all that, the intricacies of that. But look, you know, when I started up the nonprofit that's now, you know, combined with Grace's existing group, this was about 2 years ago now. You know, it's just, you realize that, you know, even if it's not something that's in all these bodies, you know, there's constantly pressure on them from all these different things, and they all go into each other. So, you know, even if the Neversink's not getting a, you know, the Bashakil comes down, it goes into Neversink, goes over. So you can't, you know, ignore it in favor of other bodies, because it's all, if you do all your work in one part and someone goes there and puts 10 developments up on there, it's not gonna, you know, it's gonna negate a lot of the positive there. And, you know, in lower Orange County, Sullivan County, a map just popped up anyway. Yeah, you know, there hasn't been as much done there as in other parts. You can kind of see, even, you know, I think Steve would know this, when we put in the monitoring stations, you know, there's tons on that side. On the Pennsylvania side, New York is still a little lacking. And in the end, without all that data and everything, it's hard to, you know, make a convincing case on why these things shouldn't be there. So we're hoping, you know, to expand that, and hopefully, you know, we're in touch with Jeff last week, just a few days before this. So we're just coming in, and, you know, we hope to catch up, but we think there's a lot of opportunities to just consolidate a lot of that as far as the data and the policies. So it's more comprehensive and hits that big area, you know, get rid of some of that fragmentation so we can, you know, just get a better overall result. That's what I hope to do through it. Hopefully this will, you know, help us all accomplish that and lead towards that as we go along. I think you're still muted there, Jeff.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Grace. We, as our newest applicants to the New York gang, we look forward to voting on your inclusion at our next steering committee meeting and having you become active members with us. And we're excited about expanding our coalition and adding your groups to us. This map we probably should have showed at the beginning. It's not translating as well as I would hope, but look at the colors on this map. Okay, so remember at the beginning of this conversation, we talked about the quote unquote New York City watershed. That's the yellow section. So where the yellow meets the blue on the left is the Cannonsville Reservoir. Where the yellow meets the blue on the right, that's the Pepacton Reservoir. And we wish we could, this map could be bigger, because we would then include, of course, the Neversink and points south, because that is in Sullivan County, because that is part of there. That's a little bit better. Thank you, Kelly. So this map was made for other purposes. That black line is the State Senator Jennifer Metzger's district. And notice there's a weakness here. In the great gerrymandering tradition of all governments, at some point in time. You see where the blue section of the river is, and you see how she has been boxed out of the main part of the tailwaters, which is the blue section, the section of river below the dams, East Branch, West Branch, and Main Stem. That is controlled by other members of the state legislature who are not in the majority party. And in New York politics, if you're not in the majority party, you got a big problem. It's just the way things are run in Albany. The majority party controls pretty much everything. So that puts us at a little bit of a weakness there, because the main chunk of our river, and by the way, I'm sitting in an office right where the two prongs of the upper blue there come together in Hancock, New York, right on the Pennsylvania border. You know, our senator, our champion senator does not actually have that part of the river, but there are ways to work around that. And she's got a whole, you know, she's got that whole Sullivan County piece all the way down. And she, like I said earlier, she's going to be a great champion for us. That green section, by the way, is what we refer to as the BMOC, which is short for the Beaverkill and the Willowemoc, two historic trout fishing rivers of the Catskill region. And they are also part of the Delaware River, Upper Delaware River watershed. So could be better map, but I hope the take home message here is, you know, when you're talking about protecting the Upper Delaware River, you've got 4 different sections you're talking about: the yellow, the blue, the green, and what's below the blue. There's 4 different stories you have to tell. Sometimes you can link them all together. But it's, you know, it's a little bit of a complex exercise when you talk about, when you go to Albany, you say protect the Upper Delaware River. You've got to be a little nimble in your storytelling. So Kelly has reminded me that I should ask everyone to get some feedback on, first of all, does everyone feel okay about the funding priority? I mean, that just to us was, you know, that was an obvious choice for us. It was in sync with the William Penn investment. It's in sync with the coalition's interests. So we hope everybody is in agreement that that's a good thing for us to be doing in Albany. And then if anybody has any suggestions on tactics or strategies, I mean, we're not able to cover every detail here, but we do have a campaign plan. We're building the coalition, establish the relationships with the legislators and the governor's office and the state agencies. So we think we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing, but you know, there's never enough resources for this kind of work. So I hope folks are open and willing and able to help us as they can, recognizing that you all are busy and you all do other things too. And if you have any suggestions, political strategy, anything, we're wide open to hearing that. Hearing nothing, Kelly, I think everything we're doing is perfect. So your investment is safe and sound with us.
Love it.
My question after seeing the map, this is Grace, is that the Neversink covers a lot of territory, has a really storied history, particularly down in Cutterbackville, with early filmmaking, early films of D.W. Griffith and Mary Pickford, and there is an historic aspect to the river's life. I mean, I know that the wide blue a line you had on the left that is out of the let's say the Democrats' territory. If there could be an enhancement of the Neversink itself, because I think that has tremendous potential nationally and historically, and threading the environment, you know, the river's health, every aspect, I think would serve an argument up in Albany for funding.
I agree, Grace. I think it's an untapped, for us, it's been an untapped resource. The firepower in the Neversink, and the lay of the land for New York State politics is very advantageous for us, and we need to take more advantage of that.
Perhaps an event at the Delaware prior to the online Hill event, Hill Day, that could, with press, with symbolic things. I mean, we joke about having oversized trouts or birds, but an attention grabber that would be able to draw on our representatives across Sullivan County, all the way up, up. So it's my day.
Great tactical suggestion, Grace, and we look forward to working with you on that. We're excited that we've got, a new voice from the Neversink. But by the way, we've also done some grant writing around developing a watershed agenda for the Neversink, and of course, you will be partners in that. We're also working with Orange County Land Trust, who I know you know because we talked about them. So we're and Steve Schwartz. We're trying to generate some resources to do some, good planning work to put together a watershed agenda for the Neversink. So that's in the works. Is there anybody else on the call who wants to add anything?
If I have a quick question for you. So how are we staying connected? Like, is New York doing anything to keep members abreast of the coalition and our work?
Yeah, I mean, so the state, the priority now in the state policy work has really energized our interaction and communication with our New York members. So we are now, Kelly, I know this will be music to your ears. We are scheduling regular coalition meetings of our members so everyone can stay updated on the latest. And by the way, anybody who's on the phone who's not a member but wants to plug into that conversation, you're welcome. Just let us know and we'll get you on the list. So we'll be doing that on a regular basis. And I think things like the Hill Day and the Neversink suggestion that Grace just made, they'll be like never before. I think we're gonna see some more of those kinds of events and those kinds of actions out of our coalition now that we're focused at the state level. So and then of course regular email communications, and folks can call us at any time if they have questions or concerns or suggestions. So I think the lines of communication are growing with our New York CDRW members, Kelly.
So this is Peter. I saw Grace suggested something about a 30-foot trout. And I don't know if it's anything, but if anybody ever been to the trout parade in Livingston Manor that they do every June, except for this year, it's pretty quirky and entertaining. I don't know if there's any way of piggybacking anything on that, but it certainly is a focus on, trout in the region.
I've certainly seen the photographs and in the record and the features in the local newspapers. I have not actually been there, but it looks like, I've seen videos also, it looks like a tremendous amount of fun, but symbolically it's critical. It's and pairing the Delaware with the Neversink as buddies, or, I mean, there's tremendous amount that can be done.
Absolutely. I'll just we only have a couple minutes left, but just to throw out another perspective on this. we talk about this all the time at FUDR. Our group was founded as a trout group, right? It was founded by a handful of fly fishermen back in the early 2000s. Dan Plummer's on the phone. He can attest to that. He was one of them, or close to it. And what we found, though, when we do watershed protection, it needs to be multidimensional, right? It also needs to be, we need the buy-in of communities, for example. So a lot of times, the trout is definitely something we can center our strategies and tactics around: the trout fishing, the fly fishing, the political power that comes around that, the people that engage in that sport. But we can't forget that we're also working with communities and local landowners, right? And county governments, municipal villages and towns. These folks, to the extent that we can, and that's where we spend a lot of energy in our, for the last several years in here in the tailwaters, is working with the villages and towns and Delaware County to bring people together around a common message on watershed protection. That also needs to be, I think, part of the formula here. So without a doubt, we should be dragging 30 feet trail to Albany, Grace, but let's always remember, to the extent that we can, the municipalities have a lot of political influence as well, and we need them to include them as well. All right, Kelly, are we done?
Yes, thank you all so much for your time today. Of course, these conversations will continue, but lots of exciting things happening in New York. And thank you all for your input with our strategy moving forward. So looking forward to the virtual event coming in October and advocating for the Environmental Protection Fund in the Upper Delaware. So thank you all, and we will keep in touch.
Thanks, CDR.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.